Your Honor, again, on behalf of our church, the Protestant Maui Church, and also the Association of Moruroa and us, and Tato, in my main language. And the WACC Pacific. Sorry for my English. The nuclear test in Polynesia. The friends always despise the consequence of radioactive legacy. Nearly 50 years after the first nuclear test in French Polynesia, no, sorry, in Maui Nui. Our land, our country is Maui. We are Maui people. Nous avons subi la colonisation. Since 1880.
They were living in colonization before, since was it 1830? Yes.
1880.
1880. That's right.
The French army returned to Moruroa this spring to renovate surveillance in the installations. 250 people will come back to work at this site. But the defense believes that the individual radiological monitoring is not necessary, yet the flows are still present, but passed in silence. Plutonium is buried under the atoll. The atoll and coral reefs are polluted. The underwater are weakened by underground explosion and radioactivity-related genetic diseases develop in the surrounding islands. So, many taboos that are reminiscent of good number of Polynesians that they have been betrayed. Investigation. Now, I would like to ask my sister to read for you.
Thank you. Is that all right?
Okay. In the gardens of Paofai, in the center of Papite, a few coconut trees stand, impenetrable, facing the Pacific Ocean and serene sun. Beside them, a wooden sculpture representing a huge cross of Lorraine, which penetrates into the heart of Pollination, sweats, and it explodes. A year ago, Gaston Flosse, then president of the French Polynesia, decides to destroy the momentum dedicated to the memory of the victims of nuclear testing, to replace it with a place called Jacques Chirac. But before a strong advocacy pursued by young Polynesians at Moruroa Etato, main association of victims and workers of Moruroa and Fangataufa, 1,200 kilometers southeast of Tahiti, he renounces. Difficult indeed to sweep of hand 193 nuclear tests, air and underground. They were led by France between 1966 and 1996 at the Center of Experimentation of the Pacific, CEP, in the Tematua Archipelago, July 2, 1966, responding on behalf of, quote, Aldebaran, and an atomic bomb exploded above Mararua Atoll. The first in the series of military tests and the environment. The environmental, health, and social consequences are always poisoning pollinations. Plutonium in the atolls. What remains of the test? They are first of hundreds of kilos of plutonium in the basement of Mararua. The Ministry of Defense himself explains that explosion consumes less than 10% of nuclear material in a bomb, said Bruno Barrio, former delegate for the monitoring of the consequences of nuclear tests with the Polynesian government. These substances will neutralize in 140,000 years. At the time, the French official discourse ensures that residents are contained and placed in the undersea basalt. But in 2006, the Ministry of Defense acknowledges that nearly a third of underground shots produce gas leaks and other nuclear materials to the surface of the soil or ocean. The former site of CEP is now a landfill. In the early 1980s, cyclone sent in the lagoon amounts of barrels of nuclear waste stored on Mararua, says Bruno Babilot. We must then find a solution. The military uses the tops of 25 underwater wells to grab ions of radioactive wastes, rubble, materials, and equipment contaminated. He continues, despite the French regulations, they had no right to mix radioactive waste to long live with others, says the expert. And waste must be movable, however, everything is concrete. Highly radioactive corals. Activity of waste accumulated in the basement of Mararua reached 13,279 terambegrials. What is that? Okay. Okay. Evaluates in June 1998. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, agency under the aegis of the United Nations, it is 371 times the threshold for the classification of basic nuclear installations. JT read also a survey of the subject, but on June 13, 2006, on Transparency and Nuclear Safety Act, exempts these thresholds military installations regardless of the home environment. However, the porosity of the coral, the corrosive character, and propagator of the waste environment serve this storage mode. In 2006, the Commission for Research and Independent Information on Radioactivity, CRISAD, is commissioned by the Polynesian government to monitor the radiological state of the site. It recommends that the two atolls, because of the radioactivity accumulated in the basement, are classified as storage sites for radioactive and registered in the inventory of site-contaminated waste. In order to implement a hazard communication, control of access to the area, then a decontamination, unsuccessfully. Threat of tsunami. Underground explosions have weakened the underwater, causing a risk of collapse of the northern part of the atoll that recognizes Marshal Sharon de la Gravière, delegate for the nuclear safety and radiation protection activities and facilities relevant to defense. In its report of 2011, landslide which could reach over 670 million square kilometers could generate on Mararua a wave that can reach a height of 20 meters and 2.5 meters in the neighboring island of Turia. Made a few weeks before the tsunami that struck Fukushima, the announcement moves the Polynesians, even in excess of homes and activities of Turia, would be submerged, says Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Solano, the Delegation Information and the Disclosure of the Defense. The Polynesian Minister of Environment and Culture, Haramona Mamatau Hutapu.
Sorry.
Heremona mam atuea hutapu.
There you go. And clear what to think, what it is safe. It is at the bottom of the lagoon is littered with debris, trucks and other chips that we cross aircraft banners when we arrive, he clamorized. The operation was dubbed a lagoonization of waste. During the dismantling of the CEP, the military simply threw the useless into the ocean. We want the France cleans all of the lagoon, he continues. The defense is not intent merely to advance, and he complies strictly to bans since 1986 and the Convention of Numea disposed of new waste. On the atoll of Howe, advanced space of the CEP, heavy metals, polychlorinated biphenyls and hydrochlorocarbons pollution is alarming, and scientific study concludes. She advocated that the people restricted their consumption of fish caught at once a month, relates Bruno Valiant, but it is the daily use of their diet. The air finding them have been fewer traces, however, they were not as clean as the Ministry of Defense since 1966. In 2013, the declassification of the 2,050 pages of documents, Secret Defense tempers that confidence. According to Girard, inaugural finding of July 1966, for example, explosives Campier Islands to the level of radiation 1,700 times higher than that recorded by the sensors of the Bachi Power over the passage of Clemophile cloud. These documents confirm 350 radioactive fallout on the Polynesian Islands between 1966 and 1974. In the stunning archives, we understand that there's real knowledge of risk on the part of authorities, scientists, and military French, says Bruno Ballard. Now, the latest official reports of the Department of Monitoring and Centers of Nuclear Department of Testing concluded a low level of artificial radioactivity. An observation shared by Girard, which describes today in Polynesia a very strong satisfactory radiological situation of very low levels of natural radioactivity and low residential cesium-137 contamination, the normal decay of radioactivity. For Bruno Balaji, it is mainly the health of Pollination, CEP workers, and their descendants are the consequences of the test. Inhalation or indigestion of a single microscopic radioactive particle may be contaminating. A study of 2010 from Institute Gustave Rossi on cancers of the thyroid in French Polynesia has shown that multiple cases were inexplainable by a nuclear test. Dr. Claude Parmentier observes, for its part, 64 Polynesian women treated in Village for thyroid cancer. Okay. All right. I'll just there's quite a few more. I think what Madame will do, she'll pass this around for more readings of the history and the damages caused by the the bombing in those atoll islands. But I will just let her to summarize or wrap up. Okay, just to finish on this because our time's up. To wrap up, the Association Barua Tato continued to grow, especially by meeting with the former workers and their families, constituting of their claims for compensation. A long work and requiring much from the former workers, they can tell us how this journey in the state of Barua and Whangatova, in particular protective measures that took place. The vast majority of workers did not garment protection and information at risk of contamination. This information are important in the setting up of the record and could explain the illnesses they suffer today. On the other hand, the association continues to fight with the authorities of the French state for recognition of radiation-induced diseases. Following challenges to the law, Marine since 2010 just succeeded on the part of the demands. The Civent Compensation Commission is no longer under the authority of the Minister for Defense, but it is independent commission being asked how to justify any refusal of compensation. This is very important because previously it is the Minister for Defense who decided he was not required to give reasons as its refusal. 2. The Civent is now under the authority of the Prime Minister. Since this changes, it seems to us that the compensation issues is taken seriously. To evidence, our lawyer received a folder that we presented some time ago. Happened in administrative tribunal here in Papeete. We now await the decision of the Simon. Last week in France, in Rennes, a former nuclear site has successfully, concerning his illness, recognized by Simon. These are the facts. It must be borne in mind that people are not yet compensated for association. If it is little advanced, but before the extent of the drama of the families of the victims, the French state does not take responsibilities. We hope that in 2014, the victims will actually take it into account. In 2013, we have received more than 20 new listings. It is where former workers have health problems that in the meantime, they decide to enroll in the association. Due to the lack of funding, we could not visit the associations in the islands. Throughout the year 2013, by press releases and press conferences, the association maintained the pressure on the local and national authorities. For 2014, the association counts on these partners to resume its activities mothballed in 2013, in particular victims to victims in the islands, and prepare their application for compensation. We have to keep in mind that very few former workers speak and write French. Since the decision of the French state to recognize that the totality of French Polynesia has been contaminated by its nuclear tests, numbers of patients treated for thyroid, leukemia, lymphoma, etc. come to inquire about the possibilities for them to complain and prepare their claim file for compensation. And in January of 2013, 4 compensations of pollinations initiated by the military themselves. 1 recognition of radiation-induced disease of an individual member of the association but not yet compensated. 6 victims recognized by the administrative tribunal awaiting decision to the Simon. Nearly 300 members of the association have diseases recognized by the law marine but cannot be admissive provided they modify Article 4 and second paragraph, delete the words negligible risk.